welcome to Legal Code and our episode on contract lifecycle management. I'm Charles Caprillion, and I have with me Gabriel Saunders, who is a leader in the legal tech operations space, and I'm going to let Gabriel introduce himself.
Well, thank you. I have been working in legal operations for the last 4 years. I started out my career as a consultant to law firms in IT, and quickly moved on to becoming a e-discovery expert for those law firms, and eventually building an early software as a service on AWS, concentrating on government surveillance and unstructured evidence, dealing with cases from the FBI, DEA, ATF, ICE, Postal Inspector Service, testified in over 150 racketeering cases in federal court, expert witness on multiple murder trials. And after another tech startup in the food tech industry, I befriended a general counsel who educated me on legal operations and contract tech. And I fell in love with the less aggressive, more, I would say, warmer space of managing money and agreements. And that eventually led to my first legal operations role at Exos, where I, over the last few years, was promoted to director of legal operations, and also have had the opportunity, since my technical experience allowed me to sit on the Exos AI Council, where I help advise our CTO, our chief data officer, our head of marketing, our head of research on our entire company's AI strategy.
Excellent introduction. Thank you very much. Clearly, with your background, you're one of the sharpest voices in the legal operations space, and I appreciate you joining us. So let's dive right in. You once described the contract lifecycle management journey as a shift from tricycles to Teslas. What, in your view, has been the real inflection point in this evolution?
Well, the point of CLM is very similar to the same transition we went through in evidence management. So like my first journey in legal technology, where when you don't have a structured database and a structured format for handling your contracts, you are lost in a bunch of unstructured information. Like managing all of your contracts through email and in multiple locations, like your hard drive or in your inbox or on the company DMS or on your local DMS or on a flash drive that you left in your car. The great difficulty of that is transparency, velocity, and accountability for your set of contracts that you're managing. So that analogy is based around basically around the velocity and speed at which you can execute once you structure your workload into a single source. And so it's also based off my experience, where when I started at Exos, we were using a Google form to collect some of our contract work, and we were using email to collect some of it in 6 different inboxes, and we were sometimes getting Slack messages, and that data was existing in dozens, if not hundreds of folders. And then we were all trying to source all of that back into a repository that was separate from all of that. And it was an incredible amount of wasted administrative time trying to manage all of those disparate places. So choosing to move to one system that included legal intake and contracting, like drafting technology, and so incepting language and tracking different drafts and tracking red lines, and then automatically linking it to eSign and automatically linking that to storage, connecting all of that together literally took my job from 10 hours a day to 4 hours a day so that I could concentrate on these things that really made bigger impacts with the company, like our AI strategy and just working cross-functionally to lower our costs and advise the business in a strategic way rather than just do administrative work.
It's an outstanding analogy. At Veloti, we've mirrored that evolution, and in many cases, we painted the picture by leading the market, beginning with things like workflow automation, workflow digitation. We're now enabling Tesla-like accelerations through features like AI clause extractions, zero training redlining, real-time collaboration. They're all built natively into the Veloti application. We call it CLM with velocity. You've warned against CLM implementations that become what we'll call contract nightmares. What's the most underestimated risk you see?
I would say that most implementations fail on a level of expectation. So it's like we live in a world of agile software development, and agile means that companies are sprinting to produce code into a cloud environment so that software is evolving very quickly, right? Like no software is ever done. So in a sense, there's a mistake in expectation that like an implementation is done. An implementation is at a point where like you are simply maintaining it and moving it along slowly as features grow with it. But there's a mentality shift that you have to make that like it's like you set it and forget it. Like that's never going to happen. Software is growing and evolving, so you're always going to be learning about new features that are coming out and learning how to implement them to improve your experience with them. Another big problem is when you don't understand the amount of work it takes to do a good implementation. And there's two types. There's a transition from like a migration from one system to another system, and then there's no system to a system. And both take a different set of work, and most often people miscalculate the amount of time it takes to get that done right, and then they despair and give up. So what I say to most people is you need to set your expectations right about the amount of work you're going to do, or your vendor or your outside partner is going to do to help make this happen. And in general, if you think something's going to take 3 months, just calculate it's going to take 6 months to handle the unknown unknowns. And that'll help your mental state be prepared for the actual amount of time something might take. Also, just getting really good at asking more questions in the inception phase of the project so that your vendor or partner helping you with the vendor truly knows all of the things you need to accomplish in order to feel that you've completed your onboarding of a new software. And sometimes that just takes being vulnerable and understanding that you may not know everything and asking a lot of questions of your vendor or partners that's going to help you. This is where I've seen the most failure, and failure of an CML implementation is a mental state. It's not an actual thing, because if you were just to not give up and continue your implementation, you would finish it. No matter, every time I've seen it, it's a failure of will, not like a failure of the software, if that makes sense.
It does, and everything you've said resonates. At Veloti, our implementation mantra is no success until you adopt. And we stress the adoption. And we pair every deployment with custom playbooks, change management workshops, organizational change workshops, and clause governance training. We've seen clients cut cycle times by 30% and more just by fixing intake and approval loops early. In your opinion, with AI being everywhere now, how often do you emphasize the need for the human on the loop, is what I'll characterize it at, characterize this is when using large language models in contract work, how do you see teams striking the balance between the AI enabler and their human input?
Yeah, I would say large language models appeared incredibly magical when they first came out because they were trained on the entire database of public human knowledge, right? But the thing about a large language model is it's a predictor of the next token, and it takes context to predict the right next token. So the user of the large language model is the most important human in the loop because they understand the subjective position of what is good in their position, in their usage. So 80-20 rule is great here. Without you should expect AI to do 80% of the work for you, as long as you've learned to articulate your needs well in the beginning of the request. And then you should expect to produce the 20% of refinement on your own. And expectations of greater than 80% are just going to make you disappointed and not put in the proper level. There's some effort that's needed. It's not a magic button. It's magical in the sense that it can produce so much, but it's not the 100%, like you're not going to have a job as a lawyer anymore. It's just going to make it so that you get deliverables done 80% faster. As long as you do that set of learning of how to ask it to give you the right thing. And vendors like yourself can make that even easier because you can do prompting in the background. You can use like post-model training from like historic data you have about contracts or the customer contracts in order to like accelerate that amount of learning the model needs from the user. But in general, again, this is another expectation issue where almost everyone I know who doesn't like the output of LLMs didn't understand how to give it context in the beginning and how it can lose context window if you talk to the same model too long. Almost every single problem is they didn't prompt it right in the beginning, or they talked to the same context window for too long. And that's why they're getting that output.
We absolutely concur. And it's why we built Velodi's AI like Copilot, legal Copilot, to be company owned, client owned, as opposed to a black box. So the customer owns the suggested inputs, the clauses, the risk indicators, counterparty insights, but legal retains final control over the decision-making process. It's speed without sacrificing accountability, and it's ownership at the customer level versus we're extracting public data to insert into companies' legal contracts, which we don't believe is the proper approach. So, or you use Kanban boards and email batching to manage legal chaos. What's your advice for embedding those principles into a CLM or a contract lifecycle management solution?
I'm a big fan of Kanban boards. It runs my entire life. So I would say I'm a visual person, right? So rather than looking at like a data sheet or like a list of emails, tasks, like you look at your inbox, what I like about a Kanban board is that the like you have your rows and then your columns, and your rows are like priority or status, and your columns are like the workload you have there. So like you can just open up one day, look at it, and like your brain in 3 seconds goes like, oh, I've got a lot of things to do today. I'm waiting on a lot of things, or so you just get kind of like a immediate understanding of what your day is going to be like when you look at your board. And especially in CLMs where the board is like a community driven situation where your business submitters are affecting where the cards are landing, your colleagues are as well. As like a leader who has to run the workload of the whole legal team or help manage it, I also love that I can just look at not just my day's work, but my entire team's workload, where everything is. So even when I'm just emailing a submitter or a leader about, like, I can instantly give understanding of expectation of time, right? So like if I see that the to-do list on my team is very low and the leader asks for something ASAP, I can pretty clearly say, we're going to be able to handle this today for you. But if I see that there's 50 to-do tasks on my 5-person team, I'm gonna try to mitigate those expectations and be like, yeah, we're gonna do our best to handle this leader. But there's like a lot of revenue on our plate. Also, cool thing about a Kanban board is I can tell like if it's quality, like work that's gonna drive revenue for the business, or if it's like work that's just handling to mitigate risk. So just very instantly, you can help communicate a group of people's sit rep, we'd call it in the military, a situation report, right? So I totally live by it.
And we're big believers in visualization and visual workflows as well. Velocity's contract dashboard acts like a legal Kanban board with filters for bottlenecks, owners, risk categories, priorities, alerts, notifications, feedback loops, escalations, take your pick. So legal ops leaders, it's not just tracking, it's workflow insight that's directing people to really the next best actions in a prioritized sequence, so that there's a weighting of the activities that are ongoing or should be completed. And as you said, a focus with regards to what's generating revenue versus what's mitigating risk, equally as important. But sometimes companies want to focus on those things that are revenue generators and close contracts sooner than they wish to take risk out of some other contracts. So you've cited some of the contract lifecycle management features that can cut contract lifecycle times by 10, 20%, 30% or more. Where do teams typically misjudge the return on investment from from contract lifecycle management solution?
I would say oftentimes people misjudge the time it takes to get adoption, because it's hard to see the return on your investment until you've finished the adoption lifecycle from the entire business. I'll give an example. Certain people at my company, I had to white glove the CLM experience for them for almost a year. And the way I would do it is like they would not log in, they would not make their own ticket. So I'd make their own ticket. I would send them the deep link to use it. I would use all of the systems for them and just say, hey, I did this for you, and include like my education and their education materials about how they could do it themselves. And I call it polite persistence, where I would just do it for them, explain to them they could do it themselves. And it's a long tail. So it's like I was able to get maybe 60% of my company to use the system in the first 3 months, but to get like full adoption maybe was a year and a half. And also, there's always going to be limitations to any system, right? I'm not talking about limitations to Volity, but there are some systems, for instance, my CLM doesn't work very well on the mobile web. So when my salespeople are out in the field and I know they're not on their computer, I will white glove that experience for them still to this day, as I work with my vendor to improve the mobile experience. So it's like there's this amount of empathy you have to have for your users as well when it comes to full adoption, and understand that like there might be a certain percentage of time you are going to help them do their job through your system. And if you give that empathy, then what happens is when that gap fills, they're going to be grateful to you, and you get a greater chance that they'll adopt whatever that feature gap or that experience gap is.
We've seen the same in our implementations, and we fully agree. And that's one of the reasons why Velocity doesn't stop at contract creation. We bring in context-sensitive user training, visual user training. We bring in audit trails, turnaround time benchmarking, clause level usage reports, everything needed to prove that the return on investment to legal and finance has been demonstrated and visualized and quantified. We even have a time to sign leaderboard, and our clients love it, including all of the interim steps in between. And where those bottlenecks occurred, not that we're searching for the guilty and neglecting to complete their work steps, but it's clearly visual, so that everybody can see where opportunities are to improve the end-to-end life cycle to complete a contract and obtain signing both on the customer side as well as on the counterparty side. You've mentioned recently that your growth came more from what you stopped doing. Has AI helped you cut down the noise?
Yeah, I would say so. Doing things that computers should do is normally the thing you shouldn't do in legal operations. So cutting down the copy paste, cutting down the copy folder and moving it here, cutting down redundant storage of things, cutting down the repeated messages you say like, hey, following up on this contract, there's been no activity for 30 days. Like figuring out a way to gently automate all of the repetitive work that is what computers are. Computers are pattern recognition and pattern production machines. So when you start to produce a pattern, you should pass it off, and you should leave novelty and flow state and to people. And so I work at Exos. We're a big proponent of health and wellness and like mental state. So it's like I'm always trying to promote the flow state of my lawyers, right? What produces flow state is when someone's right in between boredom and overwhelmed. So as long as there's a little bit of challenge and if there's some novelty, you'll be able to keep somebody in flow state. So when I start to see an agreement that just starts to have the same red lines over and over again, the same complications over and over again, that's when I'm working with AI to automate that red line for them so that they don't do it anymore. It's become a pattern and they're going to just concentrate, and then some flagging, right? For when something's out of the ordinary. So then again, I'm keeping them in flow state because they're dealing with something novel and something that allows them to do what they went to law school for, which was critically think and critically write.
We agree. At Veloti, we've designed our AI engine to eliminate those low value, non-value, busy work activities, similar to what you mentioned, cutting and pasting, moving documents from folder to folder. One of my, I guess, pets is like tracking NDAs or scanning for missing indemnity clauses. Just finding the current NDA has been a challenge for me throughout my career. Our database guarantees that the most current version of each of the legal documents and clauses are readily accessible, and they don't become current and usable until legal promotes them to that category. So our AI engine surfaces what matters and it hides the rest. And hide is probably not the correct word, but the rest doesn't need to be focused on. It's decluttering at scale, as we call it. What's the biggest myth you see about legal AI, and you wish that more people would unlearn that myth?
That it's an easy button, that like you can just say, write me a contract and you get a wonderful contract. I would say working with AI is like learning any skill. There's a learning curve. It's a new way of thinking about how to interact with computers. And as long as you are willing to take the learning curve time to learn that skill, you will get the benefit from it. And you can work with partners that cut down that learning curve time. Like if you want to go learn with base ChatGPT, the time to delivery, the time to learning is going to be far deeper, and you're going to have to invest far more time than if you use a vendor who's cut a bunch of that time for you and done a bunch of prompting in the background for you. But still, it's still a skill that you're going to learn even with a vendor. It's just going to be a much shorter learn cycle. But yeah, that biggest myth is that it's just an easy button and that you can just say, give me good contract, and boom, there's a 100-page MSA written for your particular business.
Spot on. We agree. And we see AI as augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, because it's contained within the client. Veloti helps lawyers make smarter and faster calls, not sideline them. It's built for the way legal actually works, but it's not just legal because it's a cross-functional sales, procurement, finance. Everybody has to be involved in crafting contracts, approving contracts, getting them signed. We often say Veloti should be more than a graveyard of PDFs. And that's consistent with your point of, the magic happens once you install it and you no longer have to do any more work. From your experience, what makes Veloti truly productive? Our solution, what really makes it productive?
Well, I've never been able to be like a full-time user in my work, but I've followed the company for a while. And like the best part of it is the thoughtful way you guys have strung together all of the different point solutions, we'd call it, right? So you can go out and buy something that just does drafting, or something that just does version control, or something that just does repository, or something that just does workflow building, or something that, so it's the thoughtful way that all of those different pieces have been put together in the single flow that like an in-house team would need to go from, I've got a brand new potential customer, to I now need to track the renewal of that agreement, track the obligations that I owe that customer, which I found, at least in my last demo, was a very novel thing that you guys are doing that I haven't seen in a lot of other companies, which is the tracking the business obligations, helping maintain that the company is meeting those business obligations of the agreement. And yeah, so it's like, when I was building legal tech, I realized that it was a bunch of small things, and the way we layered all those small things together in the experience for the user was the real key. So I know Veloti does a really good job of kind of layering all the different experiences we need, from we might have a brand new deal to now I got to make sure I renew it, and I need to make sure we met those obligations, and I'm going to try to upsell them and, keep this deal on the books for another 3 years.
These are all areas that are core to our approach, plus more. The Veloti solution has a myriad of features, some of which alert you to upcoming renewals, deviations from preferred clauses, approvals that are stuck in the workflow cycle and have been. So it's really not legal that's the bottleneck. It's always the enabler to improve the cycle times and improve first-time accuracy of contracts. I've worked with many customers that had countless evergreen contracts that they did not even know were auto renewing on an annual basis. So in addition to providing upcoming alerts, etc., we can ferret out and categorize those types of contracts that haven't been looked at for years or potentially decades, because sadly I've seen some of those as well. You track many legal tech tools. What do you think the contract lifecycle management, or CLM platform, should integrate next to build a true end-to-end stack?
I would say, if I were to give advice to the CLM market in general, is that to not get caught on the side of fully structured data as vector databases and large language models improve and lower in cost. So there's going to be a space where the compute and all the benefit might sit in the background, and there's going to be less need for your own static, AWS servers holding a copy of the contract that my company also keeps in my DMS. So there's going to be this potential for, I'll call it like the CLM in the background, where you're meeting me in Word, you're meeting me in my email client, you're meeting me in my DMS, and all the parts that I would have logged into your SaaS to do are happening behind the scenes, and you're just delivering to me through an AI experience. So it's almost like it's just a new UX and kind of a new way where we're going to be moving some data from a structured database to a vector database, and just being sure you're on the wave of that transition, so that companies that started that are newer in the 4th generation of legal tech, that started over here in vector databases and have maybe structured databases informing their vector database, that, as the computational science changes, you're not married to having this huge structured database, and you don't make the transition to where their structured database is kind of informing your vector database. But computational science is not here yet. Vector databases are far too expensive. The context window on LLMs is far too small for this transition to be happening immediately.
We agree, and we are working on many additional features and capabilities within the solution that integrate with other functional silos: customer relationship management, strategic sourcing, procure to pay, and integrate with the leading products in those functional silos, so that the people that work in those functional organizations do not necessarily have to exit where they are working, but they have access to those clauses that they are accountable for with regards to being able to change, and they don't have access to the clauses that they shouldn't be changing. So we're excited about the frontiers that are coming forward, but we concur with your point of view with regards to where focus should be next. Looking ahead, what do you see on the frontier for CLM, for ESG, for global compliance, for AI governance? That's a wide open area right now, but pretty broad, and that discussion could go on for a long time. But what do you see for CLM, ESG, compliance, AI governance, and what are your thoughts there?
So there's going to be a transition from workflow to agent, right? And so a workflow is an if-then thing that's set up by a human, and it's very static. And there's going to be a transition to more of an agent model, which includes MCP servers and allowing LLMs to make some more decisions, and it'll just make workflows more flexible. So I see, and then think about this is going to happen in all of the places where you're going to do integrations. So your CRM, your ERP, they're also going to transition from workflows that are really static to workflows that also have agentic aspects of letting the LLMs make some decisions based off an MCP server. So learning and working with other companies in different spaces so that we can have the agent to agent communication. So that when I ask my CLM to do something, it's not just going to follow an if-then workflow, it's going to follow a more agentic workflow that will allow my agent to go ask my CRM agent a question about its database and its information, and then come back and deliver to me human level work or reporting that's going to be not just in my CLM database, but in all of the other data sets that are associated in my business. That is, I see a future of agent orchestration between traditional data sets inside a business. And that's a frontier I see 5-10 years becoming mature.
We concur, and especially on the agentic AI aspect, specific to each company's installation, because everybody works differently. There are tons of similarities, but each company has their own proprietary information, their proprietary approval cycles, their own installations of ERPs and CRMs, and we fully believe that the agentic AI aspect of the Veloti tool, as the years go by, will significantly improve those interactions. So it's not an if-then, it's actually predictively modeling and or focusing on suggestions that maybe a human wouldn't have thought of, but the model has learned so well that it's now identifying these as areas that should be looked at. So we're totally aligned on that. We're exploring ESG clause monitoring, cross-border compliance templates. We already have some multilingual contracts in place. That becomes very challenging depending on the language, but it's all within the Veloti solution. And it's about us being ahead of the next wave of contracting complexity. We're a leader, not a follower. but we're not too far out in front where it's that edge that potentially has blood on it. Finally, if you had one piece of advice for a contract lifecycle management like us, aiming for true enterprise adoption, what would it be?
I think you're already on the right track. If you're looking to the higher you go up, the larger the organization you want to work with, the more in place the business systems are. So the better you can integrate with existing business systems, existing ticketing, it's just like the flexibility just goes down the bigger the business you work with. So the more flexible you can be, the more integrated you can be as a system, the better you can enter as a puzzle piece into a larger organization. So concentrate on really great integrations, like maybe an integration engine, an integration agent, some way to like even expand exponentially the number of systems you can work with, an integration protocol. This is if your mission is to go work with the biggest businesses in the world, then that's the number one thing you need to concentrate on.
That's very important what you've just said. We agree. It's also incredibly actionable because it takes work to deploy a CLM solution. As you said earlier, you can't just buy it and push the easy button and expect everything to be done for you. But it's exactly the mindset we carry forward at Veloti, and we're not just here to sell software. We transform how contracts work for modern legal teams and companies that are at the category leaders in their space or at the forefront of customer and supplier relationship management, as well as compliance and risk management. So Veloti appreciates your input. This was a masterclass from my point of view. And we thank you for sharing your insights with our community. For anyone looking to make contracts faster, smarter, and more strategic, feel free to check out Veloti's CLM at veloti.com and contact us for more information. We'll be more than glad to provide education. We'll be more than glad to just provide insights. And, Gabriel as well. Again, we appreciate you and we also appreciate your service in the armed forces.
Thank you so much for having me on today.